Hello, fellow kind of critics. Today we're going to check out Aquaman and Bumblebee. Let's start out with Aquaman. So, James Wan was able to prove with Aquaman that even with a declining reputation of quality with a company that is already throwing out a multi-million-dollar universe for a cleaner slate, it's not that hard to make a fun and decent movie that isn't Marvel, or rather trying to replicate it. Leave it to the guy who can make spook houses and stunt cars into something that is still fun and entertaining rather than exhausting. Give Wan a budget and he can make a simple story as interesting as possible. The case with Aquaman is that it is a very basic MacGuffin story, but one that is necessary to the character, as Justice League did not make Aquaman memorable at all, aside from this.
Amen.
With that being said, Aquaman must stop the Kingdom of Atlantis from starting a war with the surface world. Meanwhile, he must deal with the idea of whether he wants to be the King of Atlantis, due to the circumstances of his birth from the Queen of Atlantis, who had fled her kingdom and fell in love with a human being. A lot of this leans into the territory of Black Panther's storyline, but I think movies involving kings, betrayals, and other royal family are just a staple that people love to get invested into. I think what makes this such a refreshing start to DC's future approach to the movies is how less slow, dull, and contemplative a lot of scenes can feel. The metaphorical and analytical interpretations of Superman and Batman always approach the moral code and whether it can be broken. That kind of slow, dull. And Wonder Woman used this type of darker undertones thanks to its World War I setting, but still had a quick pace in its storytelling. Aquaman throws out this approach with a simple origin story that was interesting and never dragged on like Man of Steel, while also peppering established character motives and themes straight away without having to resort completely to crippling the pace. I counted 6 or 7 times when a character moment or a few minutes of dialogue then transitions to the next action scene that moves along to the next story beat. It becomes so fun that it's just expected that an explosion to the next action scene was always certain. Jason Momoa as Aquaman also has a very great charisma that was evident from the little lines he did have in Justice League, and his own interpretation of the character felt exciting and feels like a reverse Thor performance. He's literally a fish out of water when it comes to understanding his place in Atlantis, and is considered an outsider from the home he never knew, but a celebrity on the surface. He's full of life and confident, yet has a dopey charm and ingenuity that I think made for a very entertaining screen presence. I think Aquaman is a great movie that tells a great story on a character that has long been an overplayed butt of the joke for casual and hardcore comic fans. And I think translating the idea of Aquaman felt very familiar and easy for James Wan, which then allowed him to put extra polish and work on the complicated CGI or underwater effects and choreography that made for some very unique action set pieces. I think a big part of the budget came to the dedication of making Atlantis and its kingdoms look very beautiful and vibrant, especially after the shit introduction in Justice League. The alien technology and fish details were so interesting and expansive that I think this is where it puts Black Panther to shame. Black Panther showed a glimpse of the hidden city of Wakanda, which is basically a generically future city from the 90s, along with Afrocentric future twists that I really wanted to see more of. Atlantis, on the other hand, not only showed us the city and flying underwater cars, we get the wildlife, the layers, and each kingdom that is divided into crab people, mermaids, and inside the Earth's core. Everything is explored and beautifully detailed that makes the journey a bit more of a spectacle compared to Black Panther's emphasis on the kingdom drama. With that being said, the movie suffers from deja vu, plot conveniences, and inconsistency with the titular character. When I mentioned the strong awareness of morality in DC superhero movies, Aquaman commits this act and was fully aware of what he was doing, which in turn creates the backstory of a certain DC villain that felt so ham-fisted that it was only briefly mentioned after their first encounter with him. Boy, if this isn't sequel baiting at its worst. Not to mention, some of the forced emotional scenes will either work for someone or it won't. And I was a bit mixed on it, to where I was genuinely shocked I cared so much about a cliche love story between Arthur's parents. Props to the supporting cast of Amber Heard, William Dafoe, and Nicole Kidman, who served great foils and kept up with Momoa's energy. It's not a perfect DC movie, to any stretch of the imagination, but when compared to Wonder Woman, this felt like a complete and entertaining experience that I hope DC can continue to follow in their upcoming projects. 5 out of 6 stars. Oh boy, Bumblebee is disappointing. It's a light and less louder version of a Michael Bay Transformers movie, yet it feels too safe for its own good. It has interesting character dynamics, that 80s aesthetic that people are still nostalgic for, and very colorful and less cobbled up designs for the Autobots and Decepticons, but the charm feels very meh. I think had this been the first movie to come out before any main Transformers movie, it would have been amazing. But as it stands, I'm very Transformers fatigued, and instead of the ambitious Bumblebee fighting Nazi story, we get kid finds Transformer and government tries to stop them for the second time. Not that there's nothing wrong with that, I think the basic premise felt a lot more easy to swallow considering how stupidly convoluted the last 3 movies have been to both lore, history, and character consistency. But now this fresh start needed to spark the interest, and it was entertaining, but I was really bored of how generic it all felt. One thing that didn't help was how beautifully rendered and detailed the war on Cybertron was in the first 5 minutes. And that's all you will ever see of those scenes. If you watch a commercial, you will see those scenes. That is all you see from that. They could have made a whole fucking movie about that. But nope. We are stuck on the planet Earth with a few robots and some interesting human characters, with the rest as generic as they come. Hailee Steinfeld is one of those less generic characters and carries the entire movie as the Shia LaBeouf and Mark Wahlberg human protagonist replacement. Out of all of them, she was the most genuine and probably had a lot more going on rather than being a testosterone-filled wet dream and audience shoo-in. Her charm and demeanor felt relatable and was never irritating as a moody teenage girl archetype because of how the script is able to provide context and understanding of why she's acting out and why there's no joy better than getting your first car. In fact, once she meets Bumblebee, the dynamic between them as well as the Iron Giant trappings that were ever present still felt fairly genuine and emotional. She speaks to Bumblebee because his inability to speak means she cannot feel judged or misunderstood from her listener, and I think it all stood up very well. There's also fairly less action this go around, and more time is taken in developing that bond between her and Bumblebee. The family dynamic was also charming, but this is where the movie was creating too many nods at once and too many parallels at worst. As a prequel to 2007's Transformers, we get the love interest in the form of a geeky boy, go figure, a bully that gets her due, Optimus Prime exposition, a cute dog interacting with a Transformer, Sector 7 origins, and a military man with a scar number 500, played by John Cena. If you've seen 2007's Transformer, this one is a little less annoying, but still detrimental considering how it attempts at separating itself from the other films only to be clinging to the established connections of those movies, as well as catering to new fans with a different interpretation of events and forcing more questions than answers on how many times the government has had to change when they met Transformers. I'm tired of it. Add to the fact that aside from Steinfeld, you get some very dry dialogue, unfunny bits, and just Bay-esque humor that makes it feel a lot less weird, but never to the outrageous madness of the originals. The prequel is as predictable as it ever will be, and I don't think a new coat of paint and more laser-focused familiar plot is a good sign of the franchise direction. For those that love to hate the Transformers movies, this might be very boring and disappointing to watch. Not because it's bad, but because it lost the charm of stupidity and is just watered-down E.T. commercial with untapped potential. And those who probably avoid the Transformers movies because of how boring they can be, this may be a change of pace, albeit one that feels far too familiar from what it's trying to get away from. Bumblebee feels like it's only good because of what has come before it, and yet the risks it doesn't take feels all the more disappointing. My solution would be just to make a movie about the Transformers and leave the human characters out, but studios probably think they know what audience want, I guess. 3 stars out of 6, it's no better nor worse than what has come before, but is it really saying that much?